G'day, Stu from UAVfutures here, and today, well, we're going to be building the ultimate 4-inch racer. I mean, look at this bad boy. Look how good this looks. This is definitely one, if you really want to rip it up at the races, this is the frame for you. This is my personal choice now when it comes to racing, and I'm having such a blast thrashing this thing around. It is absolutely killer. Before we get started, a few words of warning. I would not recommend this for a first-time builder. It is actually really crammed in here. You don't have too much space because, I mean, look at that profile. It is absolutely tiny in here. The weight is super light. It's coming in at about 210 or 215 grams, so super light. It can't carry a GoPro, so you're not going to be getting any GoPro footage or anything like that. This is purely about just killing it at the races, super speeds, and I guess just ripping it up. So without further ado, we'll stick it on the bench and get started. I'll stop around. Oh, actually, and there is one thing that I want to talk about just here. My computer decided to eat a lot of this flight footage, so some things might change around in here, and you might notice some things look a little bit different because it just decided to mysteriously lose my video files that I'd imported. And then I'd already gone on with filming. So what I did for you guys, I had to take it back apart and then put it re-together. So if some things are in a little bit of a different order, that's why in this video. But I'm sure if you guys are looking, you pros out there or anyone who's interested, I'm sure you'll be able to follow along because it doesn't change up too much. But I thought if you have any questions, that's probably why. Alrighty, so let's have a look at everything we're going to need in this crazy sort of build. So what we're going to have, we're going to need a frame. So I'm going to be using the Orion 155X, and we'll go through all these things in detail in a little bit. And inside that frame, for sort of the components, we're going to have our PDB, a little Pololu voltage regulator, an Afro 32 flight controller, and connecting all that up is our receiver. And then on the FPV side, you're going to need a camera and a VTX, a pigtail and an antenna. And then the propulsion and the good stuff, I guess we're going to be rocking some ESCs, some 1806 motors because they're the ones that will fit on this tiny frame, some 4-inch props, and you need a battery strap. And I just decided I feel like putting some LEDs on this one, so when I'm flying around with people they can see it, because I plan to be flying this one a lot. Anyway, let's get started and get to work. Now this build is going to be a little bit different because it is very tight in here. If you look at this thing to rock 4-inch props is going to be requiring some very careful planning on such a little build. So we're going to do things a little bit differently, and to get everything inside here, we're going to work on the stack first. So we're going to be talking about our flight controller, our PDB, and getting this all prepped and ready. So let's get started on these bad boys. Alrighty, so we're going to be using this special Orion 155 PDB, and this has been specially made for the frame, so it makes for an extremely clean sort of build, but there is a little bit of work to do. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to be soldering up all the pads we're going to be using. So we've got our ground and our positives for each of our ESCs, so 1, 2, 3, and 4. We'll also need to solder in the back part just here. That's where the voltage is going to go from your battery, so your ground and your voltage in. And then once that's done, we're going to work on installing the little Pololu just underneath. So I'm going to go around and solder the top pads, and then we'll come back and we'll work on putting the Pololu in. Alright, so our board's looking pretty good just here. We've pre-tinned all the top of it. Now what we're going to do, we're going to get ready to install the little Pololu. And it's pretty easy because there's a little symbol here which will line up exactly with the sort of little ports just on the bottom of the Pololu. And what we're going to do, we're going to put this inside here, but I want my build to be super clean. So I'm actually going to pull some of these pins out, slide it through, and then solder them in. You could use a block or something like that, but I want my stack to be super clean. So I'm going to pull out 4 individual pins, if I can, and install them individually. This last one's a bit tricky. 4. And I've got a bit of blue tack under here, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to slide those through pretty much just so enough is sticking out the top so I can put it in and install it on my Pololu. Alright, so I've pushed my pins through and into the blue tack underneath, and you can see that's sort of holding it in place, and they're down as short as they can be, so it's going to hold it perfectly while I solder that in just there. So let's go ahead and do that now. There we go, and we should be able to slide our pins out. Okay, so there we are. We've got our little pins in our Pololu. Now what we want to do, we want to put on a little bit of electrical tape, just in case it's a good little bit, just in case there's a little short or something like that in the board just here. Alrighty, so I'm going to put my electrical tape on right there and trim it up. It's looking good, and now we'll be ready to put it into our board and then solder it onto the PDB. So just make sure you get it around the right way again. Alright, so that's all through. Now what we're going to do, we're just going to solder in these pins just here and then cut them as short as we can. Rightio, and now it's time to trim this with our wire cutters. So make sure these are nice and as short as we can get them, really. There we go. Bits of metal flying everywhere in that explosion. But there we go, so that's looking good. We've got our Polulu in there, and now it's time to go about setting up our flight controller. Alright, so let's talk about our flight controller. So we're going to be using the Afro Mini 32, and that's fantastic because look at its size. It is absolutely tiny, super light, and it's going to fit, and it's specially designed for this PDB. But in saying that, this is an acro board, and one thing I don't actually really enjoy on these boards is you need to hook them up to an FTDI sort of little adapter. So that's something like this, and then once it's hooked up to this, then you can connect that to your USB and connect that to your computer and things like that. So I've left these little wires on here, so I've done a little bit of work on mine. So I'm just using the 5-volt ground and the RX and TX just here. So there's a little bit of sort of some things on the software side of things that needs to be done in order to get that working. But there's a good little link on the Flinosaurus or Flinosaurus, I don't actually know how to say that, on the Flinosaurus website, and that's got a sort of a little video on how he goes about setting this up so you can hook it up to your computer. Now what we need to do to hook it up to our PDB, you actually get these this little stack here of little pins, and then we're going to slide this over and solder it on just like that. So it's going to have a little space, and I actually plan to put a little bit of foam in here to support it as well. But what I need to do before I do that, because I want to have a really nice clean build, I'm going to mark all these pins so I know just how high to cut them before I solder them in. So I'm going to get a big fat texter now and mark them. So now I'm going to take this off, and wherever I see those sort of black marks, that's where I'm going to cut the length of my pins, because that's how deep they need to be when they're inside this on the PDB. So I'm going to cut these now and then show you what it looks like right here. Alright, and here it is all cut, and I got to say this was a bit of a mission. So if I can do it with these older, these are sort of the first wire cutters I ever got about a year ago, and I think they cost me about $10 in like a 3-pack. When I was just getting into the hobby. So if I can do it with these bad boys, I'm sure some of you guys out there with much better tools will be able to do it. And I'll also take my $20 soldering iron, and now we're just going to solder in all these pins. There we go. So it's looking good. We're just going to sit on our Afro Mini right now, so our flight controller just over the top. Alrighty, so that is sort of our PDB and flight controller stack right there, looking very pretty. Alrighty, so now pretty exciting. We're going to work on putting this into our frame and mounting it in there. But you're not going to trick me this time, battery connectors. So remember to put your battery strap on just here, because I seem to always forget this. So right now, I'm going to put my battery strap on, and that's fantastic. So now I'm not going to forget it. I might just lay it out that way, just to keep it clean. Alrighty, let's keep going. Alright, so before I really put this in here, what I do want to make sure is that none of these pins are going to short circuit, and they're probably not going to anyway, because there's not really too many things it can touch. But I guess just to stop it, and just a bit of a safety precaution, I'm going to put a little bit of tape around it, just like that. And it's also going to rest here on the actual battery strap itself, so there's almost no way that it can actually touch the carbon, and there's no carbon underneath here anyway, so it's going to be very, very good. I don't know why I said it like that. And how I'm going to secure it, I'm actually just going to take the screw, put it through here, and then just put a little plastic nut on the other side. So I'm going to do that to all four and show you how she looks. The battery strap, I had it on the wrong way, so lucky I double checked that. Anyway, now we can screw the top of it on and get on with it. So we're going to screw this on and show you how it looks. So there it is. There's our PDB and flight controller down here on this tiny little bad boy. Now what we need to do is we get to do the fun stuff. So we're going to now actually get into hooking up our motors and our ESCs. So let's start on those. Alrighty, and speaking of the motors, now this frame can only take 1806 motors, so I had to think very carefully about what motors I wanted to use because I really want some good quality motors on this bad boy. I did have some of these lying around. These are ready-made RC 1806 2700 kVs, but I'm not sure if I'm the biggest fan of those. So I sent the guys over at Next FPV an email and asking what they've got, and they're absolute legends, and they hooked me up with some of these Cobra motors 1806 2450 kVs. And I think they're going to be absolutely perfect on this little build, so it should be a little powerhouse. Alright, so now we know what motors and ESCs we're going to use. We're going to sort of go in and screw these down so our 4 motors are in, and then we'll have a look at where we need to cut the cords for putting cut the wires for putting in our ESCs. And I really recommend people use some Loctite as well when they're putting their motors in, because it's going to stop them coming apart in the vibrations when you're flying around. Alright, so let's continue with hooking up our ESCs now that we've tinned all our wires on the outside here and we've cut them. And you might be saying, Stuart, this looks a little bit different. How did you get the flight controller and stuff off just here? Well, that is because this is where my computer decided to eat the footage. But I didn't want to just cut to anything, so this is where I've gone back and I've taken everything apart, and now I'm going to be putting it back together again for you guys. So that's why it might look a little bit different, but same sort of process. So yeah, just apologize for that bit. But anyway, let's keep going and let's start hooking up our ESCs. Now, what I've actually decided since last time I built this as well is I'm actually just going to direct solder these straight across, so the top wire to the top pad, the middle wire to the middle pad, and the bottom wire to the bottom pad, and then I'm going to change the direction that the motor spins using some BL Heli software. So that's how I'm going to do that. And because it's such a tight build as well, we don't really have space to be crossing over our wires. So I'm just going to hook them all straight up across. So I've got my ESC here. So let's solder this in. So the top wire to the top pad. The middle wire, I'll just clean my solder tip here. The middle wire is going to go to the middle pad. You might also notice I got a new soldering iron as well. So there we go. The middle wire to the middle pad. And then we're going to just direct solder across this bottom wire here to the bottom pad. There we go. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do that to all my ESCs, and then I'm going to put a little bit of heat shrink over them, and then we can get started soldering up to the PDB. Alright, now before we cut our wires, what it is important to do is to make sure that you put the top of this pod just sit on loosely, because you actually need to route around the outside of that, because there's no point if you measure your wires straight across and then you find out that this carbon's in the way, that's not going to help you very much. So what you need to do, just measure, cut, strip, and pre-tin each of your wires so they're at the right length, making sure they're routed around this frame right here. So I'm going to do that with each one of these sort of messy wires, and then we'll cut back to what she looks like. Alright, so I've cut all my wires and I've stripped them all, and now I'm just going to pre-tin the ends before we solder them up to our PDB. Alright, now what we need to do, we need to solder up each one of these wires to the PDB, and I've left this little bit of carbon in here just as a bit of a guide so I know how to route it around. But anyway, here's where they are. So we've got a signal wire, a ground, a positive, and then you've also got this tiny little ground wire which I'm going to connect up just here. Not everybody connects these tiny little ones, but I'm going to. I don't think it's going to cause any harm, and it's pretty light anyway. So we're just going to connect up these 4 wires to the PDB. Now, and I would start with whatever one you think is the most difficult as well. So I think this over here, this positive wire is going to be the most difficult. So I'm going to put him in first. Followed by the ground. Then I'm going to do the signal. And then the little ground wire. There we go. So there is one of my ESCs done. We're going to do this to all 4 of them, and then we'll cut back to what she looks like after that. Alright, so here it is, super neat, and you can see what I've done, really tried hard to do here is make sure that these ESCs line up with the arms, so we have a lot of space in just here where the air can be pushed down by the props on the inside, so we're not getting any turbulent air. But yeah, really neatly wired up, and it fits nicely when I want to put these in. It's not cutting over any of the wires or anything like that. Alright, let's move on. Let's put in our battery connector, and I'm also going to slide in a battery strap now, why it's easy rather than a little bit later when everything's on. It might be a little bit more difficult.
Alright, so my battery strap is on underneath right here. And for connecting up the actual battery, all I've done, I've taken an XT60 connector because that's what fits my batteries. And I've soldered in just a little bit of wire. That's a really easy process. And I'll leave a link just here on showing you how I've done that because I've done that many times before. And then I'm simply going to slide them up and put them inside just like that and solder them straight in. So it's going to go very well. So I'm going to do that now. There we go. So that's looking good. My battery lead is in here, and then at the end, just before I fly, I'm going to heat shrink all my heat shrink down, and that's when I'll tighten up this heat shrink as well. All right, let's get back on with the build. All right, so the next thing we're going to do, we're going to start soldering up our little Afro Mini flight controller and getting it ready to go in our PDB. Now I know I covered this before, but I've gone back in and this is the second time. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to hook up this little connector just here so I can plug it into my FTDI connector. So I'm just going to pre-tin these pads across the bottom. Rightio, super easy, and then I'm going to connect these. Look, I just cut this off an old, I think it was an old flight controller pack or some sort of header pins that came with it. Feel free to use any colors that you like, just remember which ones are which in your build. So now we can connect this up to our computer, and this is when I'd recommend putting on beta flight. But one thing I really recommend to do, we've got the boot pads underneath just here. I'm just going to pre-tin those and connect two little wires, so if anything ever goes wrong, we will actually connect two little wires just like this. We can still access the bootloader, because last time I did this I needed to access it and it was hard soldered in, so it was a nightmare to try and get. So this build around, I've learnt, make sure you've always got access to your bootloader pins. Alright, so I'm going to solder in two little cables for that now, and then we'll continue on with the build. Alright, so now I've got the right firmware and stuff on there, and I've got access to my bootloader pins. We're going to just slide that on top of these pins right here. And that's going to give us a nice little sort of really clean stack, and we're going to put, we're just going to solder these pins right in, and that'll hold it very firmly. But just before we do that, there is these little parts just here. I just want to put a little bit of glue over these, simply so they don't short out on any of these ports just underneath. It should be fine, but just a bit of a safety precaution. And we'll use this hot glue again later just to sort of secure some of these tiny little leads, but we'll do that at the end when we've got a few more on there. Alright, so now we've put our glue on, it's time to solder in our little flight controller. I'm going to sit that on there, and then we should be good to go, just soldering it straight in. Fantastic. Alright, let's get on with it. Alright, so we've got our flight controller soldered in here, and what I'm going to do, I've decided, because I'm going to be racing this against some people, I'm going to put some little wires in for our LEDs. I'm going to run this off these two little pads just back here. Now I'm using some red and white wires, but feel free to use whatever works for you. So just make sure you get them around the right way, and I'm going to make sure that this red is my, what's this? Red is my voltage, and in this case my white is going to be my ground. So this is going to be to hook up some LEDs later. Alright, and then I'm just going to solder this to this LED. This will be bright orange. These are really cool LEDs actually. And then the other thing, the last sort of thing I need to solder to the PDB right here is this. Now this is my VTX. It's a 25 milliwatt sort of race band one. And this is fantastic because this is great for when you're racing with other people, and especially indoors. This is not going to cause very much interference with other people at all if you do your channels properly. So I'm going to solder this in. I'll take this little pad out actually. And then I'm going to use these three to hook up my camera later. So that's going to be for powering my camera, but we need to do this. So this, the outside one here, this is my positive. So I'm going to solder that as well to my positive one. And then I'll also solder my ground over here. Alrighty, and the final bit of soldering we sort of need to do here, we just need to hook up our receiver. Now I've got a D-pinned D4R2, so but feel free to use whatever receiver you need to, but we simply need to hook up the signal wire to this little pad just here, and then our 5 volt I'm going to hook up to this pad, and our ground to the one next to it. So very simple. There we go. And then I'm going to solder my LEDs while I'm at it. So just get this around the right way. So that's my positive. Alrighty, so there's my LEDs. Alright, now the last little thing we need to do, sort of to have everything on here, is make a little plug so our VTX wires are going to be able to power our camera and get a feed from it. Now this is a really easy step and I've done it quite a few times before, so I'm sure you guys will be able, especially following along with this build. But essentially what I need to do, I've got these 3 wires here. This plug is going to fit in the back of my camera and we need to hook up the right colors to the voltage, ground and the video. So we're just going to do that, put a bit of heat shrink on. I'm not going to show you the process, I'm not going to record it, I'm just going to do it and show you the end result. Alright, so here it is, there's the little connection. So what we'll do, we're able to hook our VTX up just here, then we'll plug in our HS117 and we would pretty much be good to go, put an antenna on. But before I sort of start putting it all together, what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a bit of hot glue just on all these tiny little wires to stop them breaking off, if anything, in some heavy crashes or anything like that. Alrighty, that's looking pretty good. Alrighty, so now time for the most exciting part of the build, and that is pretty much putting it all together and putting the props on, making sure everything is correct, sort of lining it up, getting it all sorted and zip tying it down. I'm not going to go through the exact process here because it's might be a little bit different depending on what build, what parts you're using, but I'm going to cut to the end process. I'm going to cut to the end process and show you what it looks like, and then I'll explain my choices from there. So it'll save you guys some time in the viewing and it'll also save me some time in filming as well. Alright, so let's have a look at what she looks like in 3, 2, 1, boom! Alright, and here she is, and I've got to say, this thing is absolutely beautiful. I mean, just look how good this thing looks. Now, this is the way I put mine together, and you notice there are a few little things we could improve on, but before we look at the weight, I just want to quickly show you the weight of this bad boy. Check this thing out. Alright, turn my scales on here, and take your guesses, and let's see what she comes in at. 213 grams. So this is with 1806 motors. This thing, 214 grams actually. This thing is going to be an absolute powerhouse. All right, so let's have a look at how we build it. So straight off the bat, we knew that the HS1177 camera would be tucked in the front here very neatly. It can't really go down on an angle any further than that in its current build, but that's fine because this thing is going to be going at some serious speed anyway. If you look in the side, I've got this zip tied down, so a little stack of my VTX, and also I'm using a D4R2 in here, and I'll see if I can show you a bit of a better picture. One thing I don't like, it's going to be very difficult to try and change the channel on this VTX. So I'd have to take it apart to change the channel, or maybe I could put a little Allen key or hex key in there. But that is one thing that is a little bit difficult. Luckily I put it on the right channel before I built it. Now just looking at just here, we've got this pigtail, and this is a little bit different than what I originally intended to use. So I was going to run a smaller pigtail out the side, and then I had the antenna coming out the back, but what I actually decided to do was use a longer one, loop it right around underneath and up the side, so the antenna is going to poke out the top, and I just figured that would be the best way to keep it out sort of from the props. If I had a smaller one, or if I could somehow make a bit of a change, it would be that there was some sort of VTX holder just here, and it would sit up perfectly, I guess, upright, and that's where your VTX would plug in and your antenna would come straight at the top. So if we could remove or drastically shorten the length of this pigtail, that would be great. Some of the other ones I've seen online, they actually run their pigtail down here out the side and they have their antenna out the back like this, but I decided to do mine this way. Now what I haven't done, I haven't zip tied down the ESCs, but I have tested them, they're all working, and I've shrunk them down, so I just need to zip tie them down. But actually I'm probably going to use a little bit of tape, and I just glued in, and it seemed like the perfect fit just here for one of these super bright RC timer LEDs, and it looks awesome. I'll show you another photo of this when it's on or flying around, but that is just glued in the back there with both hot glue and also some epoxy. Underneath you can see I've got just a little bit of foam just here, and that's zip tied down, and that's where my battery is going to rest, and I've zip tied and heat shrunk down my XT60 connector, and then I've of course put on some Dow Tri-Blade 40-45 bullnose props, and this thing is an absolute beast. That is so much power. These motors I think are the perfect size for this size prop.
So there it is, there's my guide to putting the ultimate 4-inch racer. Now, I know, thanks guys for bearing with me, because this thing was a little bit difficult for me to build. I had to tear it down quite a few times, and especially with the computer losing a lot of that footage. But we persisted, and it has paid off, because this is probably my personal, and I'm sorry to some of my other quads, my new personal favorite quad for flying. It is an absolute powerhouse, and I know you guys are going to love it. If you've got any questions or comments, leave them down below and I'll get back to you. If you like this video, make sure you hit that like button. Subscribe for more FPV related content, and as always, happy flying! Alrighty, so here it is flying around, and I just took it out to my mate's. He's got a bit of a property, so we're flying it around here, and it was I really enjoyed flying it. But
Just remember that this thing is not only a 180, but this is also on 3S. So for its size and its power, it is absolutely killing it. So I don't think I've actually seen a faster 3S racer that is just a 180. It is absolutely smashing it around this little course just here. And what I also love, I'll stop rambling in a minute, you can really smash some tight spaces with this thing. So it's fantastic at fitting through tiny gaps. Woo! Anyway, I'm going to stop rambling so you can enjoy this flight footage, but definitely recommend this one if you're serious about building yourself an awesome racer, because this thing is going to be very hard to beat. Anyway, happy flying!